very, very simply like Nike. We think, wow, Nike is amazing. They had Michael Jordan. That's associative brand building. So that's why brand marketing is super, 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 super important.
Hello and welcome to SEO Ranking's Do Follow podcast. Here we hold regular talks with SEO and digital marketing experts to discuss how to SEO topics and share actionable insights with the SEO community. So subscribe to stay on top of everything going on in SEO. Today we're going to be talking about brand evolution, when and how to refresh your digital identity. To help us explore this topic in depth, we've invited Mordy Oberstein, the head of SEO Branding at Wix. Welcome, Mordy. Great to have you with us.
Hey, it's great to be back on the podcast. Thanks for having me again.
Awesome. If you don't mind, I just want to jump right into it because we have a lot of questions about brand evolution, brand redesign, and branding. So tell us a bit more how you got into being the head of SEO Branding at Wix, and what is your experience with brand strategy at Wix?
Yeah, so basically, Wix needed to reposition and basically I wouldn't call it refresh, I call it revitalize their brand identity and branding overall for the SEO and digital marketing community. So I came in and pivoted the brand in a new direction as it relates to how digital marketers of all kinds, but particularly SEOs, see and feel about Wix.
It looks like you're the perfect person to help us explore this topic in full. Now, let us get our definitions straight. What is brand evolution and what is brand redesign?
Yeah, I mean, the whole concept of branding is very ethereal. It's like not like, it's very abstract. I look at branding in general as the way two parties associate to each other. So basically, you have the brand and who they are and what they are, and then you have the audience. And branding is the intersection. It's the meeting of the audience needs and identity and the brand's identity and offering. That intersection is branding, basically, and it's very associative. It's how I feel, how I think about a particular brand. Like, very, very simply, like Nike. We think, wow, Nike is amazing. They had Michael Jordan. That's associative brand building. Brand refresh or brand redesign is basically when you're at one point and you decide for whatever reason, I'm sure we'll get into, to pivot. And usually that gets discussed mostly with design, but I think as we're going to talk about, it really starts way before design.
So why is branding so important? Why is it a crucial aspect of maintaining a successful digital presence? And what is the main goal of brand evolution?
I look at branding as momentum building. So basically, to make like a distinction between like performance marketing and brand marketing, performance marketing is basically closing the deal. Brand marketing is basically like if I was a farmer, it wouldn't even be planting the seeds. It'd be sowing the ground and ripping up the earth so you could eventually plant the seed and then eventually have a plant, which we'll call conversion. Brand marketing produces all of the foundation and ability to make a conversion. So that's why brand marketing is super, 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 super important. And what it basically does is, and that's why I think brand evolution is so important, is it creates momentum. It creates cadence. It creates something for the audience to grab onto that they can then use, or then you can rather than use to drive a conversion eventually. That's a super top level answer.
Yeah, I love that answer, Mordy. But what should we look out for to understand that it's high time for us to reconsider our brand redesign and refresh our digital identity? So what does a company look out for to understand that it's perfect time to talk about redesign?
So I say there's basically three things. I'll try to go in order of less important. Less important, I think, is just where the world is at. Like where is design language at? Where is tone at? How do people talk now versus in the past? I mean, over the long term, it's very important. I think, from one day to the next day, that's less noticeable, less important. Then I think these are both probably equal of importance. There's internal and external pushes for a brand evolution or a brand redesign. And that's either your identity has changed, right? Who you are as a brand has fundamentally changed. Dunkin' Donuts would be a good example of this. They went from Dunkin' Donuts to Dunkin' because they expanded their whole offering. They're not just donuts, we're everything now. Time to refresh. Or there's an external push where the audience, for some reason, is having a hard time with you, right? So Starbucks would be a good example. I'm not saying they should do a refresh now, but Starbucks would be a good example of a brand that people are suddenly, it's not so sudden, are having a problem with.
What about the effective ways of gathering insights related to brand redesign? So how do you understand that it's that you need to redesign your brand? Obviously, you need to interact with your audience, but how do you go about collecting these specific insights? Where do you start?
Yeah, so I'm a big believer that everything should start internally, meaning everything should start with brand identity, who you are. Because even if your audience is having a problem with you, if you are what you are, then you are what you are. You can't paint lipstick on a pig. You can't pretend to be something that you're not. So everything begins and ends with core brand identity. and making sure that either you're tapped into it the right way, you've developed it the right way, or that you even have one to begin with. Now, if there are issues, and by the way, generally speaking, the core brand identity is not what people generally have an issue with. It's the positioning and the messaging and the way you go about that pressing that core brand identity. If you feel like you have fundamentally sound, short up, a deep and meaningful identity, and then you start seeing, okay, like there's an issue here. We have a toxic relationship with our audience. Let's go very extreme. There's a toxic relationship. You'll see that on social media. You'll see that with what people are saying about you. You'll see that with the articles people write about you, reviews people, anything that's coming from your audience, you need to have a finger on the pulse of. And what makes brand, I guess, hard, I'm sure we'll talk about measurement in a bit. What makes brand hard is there's no it's not like a Google Analytics report where you're going to see, okay, traffic is down. Clearly there's an issue. It's really being able to have your finger on the pulse and understanding, well, wait a second, when I'm doing an audit, and you should audit things regularly, and I see there used to be 10 articles when you search for my brand that were great. Now there's 5 that are great and 5 that are, to say I'm horrible. And those are signals that something needs to change. Now, sometimes it's not so clear. A lot of the times, rather, it's not so clear. And what you are trying to do is look at who's interacting with you on social. Let's say, just as an example, social is one place to look at. It's the most obvious place to look at. Who's interacting with you now versus in the past? Has the audience shifted, right? Let's say, for example, the professional audience, the pros, the advanced audience interact with me, and now they're not. Now it's the beginner audience. Okay, something happened there. I'm not getting the level of engagement or whatever it is. It can even come down to, and by the way, all the things that I'm saying now are ways to actually measure your brand. I used to be able to really easily partner with other brands. Now I'm having a harder time. I wonder why that is. All of those are signals that maybe something needs to change.
I want to ask another question, and I know that a lot of our listeners are also interested in this. How do you make sure that you are true to your core self while you're embracing brand change?
Yeah, and that's a complicated question because sometimes you need to create a sub-brand. Like Michelin Tire and Michelin, the rating, like you don't think of them as the same thing, even though it's the same name. They sort of separated the two things out. Or I'll give you another example. Coors, the beer company, and Blue Moon are the same company, but they keep themselves distanced from each other on purpose. So sometimes you're going to have conflicting or problematic identities. You have to separate them out. Other times it's really, again, brand identity has to be based on reality. So brand identity can change if your product has changed, if your offering has changed, then maybe it's time. So again, Dunkin' Donuts being the easiest example. Back in the day, all they saw was donuts and maybe a cup of coffee. And it was really all about the donut. Now it's really about the drink. So the donut became secondary to the drinks. Our identity has shifted, but that identity is rooted in the product changing. They didn't pull it out of a hat and pull it out of thin air. It's based on a substantive product or service offering change.
Without focusing on a specific brand, could you tell us what the specific steps of a successful brand refresh involve?
Yeah, I got you. Okay. So again, let's assume there's an actual offering change. It's not that you need to reposition and refocus your messaging and your positioning. Let's go all the way and start with the core brand identity. You need to, I call it a depth concept. You need to have a depth concept. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by this. You can have let's say I'm an amusement park. I could say amusement park is fun. That's my identity. We're a place for fun. That's not a very deep concept. That's not something, because again, in brand marketing, you're trying to make unconscious, latent connections between you and the audience. There's not a lot of meat for the audience to grab onto. So the first thing to do is to internally look at yourself and try to really understand who you are in a meaningful way. And there's no exact science to this. I'll say brand identity isn't created. It's tapped into. It's really looking at your offering. It's an understanding how it's meaningful. In the case of an amusement park, you might say we are a place where you can let go for a day. You can just let go. Life is hard. Come to us. Let go for a day. We will help you escape reality. That's a much more meaningful concept than we are fun for thrill seekers. So you need to be able, and that's where that's why you need to have a brand marketing team or a brand marketer consultant or whatever, someone who knows what they're doing with this, because it's not easy to create brand identity because you really have to be able to tap in. Once you've tapped into the core brand identity, right? So now you need to develop positioning and messaging. So what you basically want to do now, and by the way, as you're creating the positioning, you're creating USPs at the same time. You can go on, I think you can go in either order. I think you can go create the USPs first, and the positioning follows, create the positioning, the USPs follow. We can debate that. It's a nuanced point. Doesn't really matter. I don't think it matters. But basically what you want to now do is take that brand identity and you want to contextualize it in terms of what the audience needs, right? And that's what we call positioning, by the way. That's a fancy way of describing positioning. I'm taking who I am, and now I'm putting it not in the context of what I am, who I am, but I'm putting myself in the context of what you need, right? So let's say I sell minivans. Right? The positioning is not, it's a vehicle where you can fit 7 passengers in it. Okay? The positioning is you can now move your kids around town much more seamlessly and save yourself a lot of hassle and a lot of time, right? I'm taking what the thing is, the product, in which case is a minivan, and I'm positioning it, I'm giving it an angle in a way that's meaningful to your life, right? Now the USP should be pretty self-evident, right? People have a hard time schlepping their 7 or 8 kids around town. Stuffing them into a compact car is insane. That's not going to work. You don't want to make multiple trips. Buy our minivan. It'll save you time and make schlepping your kids around town to all of their soccer matches or football, depending upon what part of the planet you're living in, much easier, right? Now the messaging should automatically flow. If I know what I am, I know how I'm positioning the product, and I know what you need because I'm positioning it the right way, then the messaging should be very simple, right? We help make your life easier. Minivans by Bob. Terrible messaging, but you got to say like it should flow for identity, it should flow into positioning, which should flow into the USPs, which should just naturally flow into your messaging. It's all one song. If you're not doing it that way, something's wrong. One thing should build upon the next thing. So if you're doing a refresh, you start with a core identity, you create a depth concept, you figure out how the audience understands your identity, meaning in what ways is your identity meaningful to the audience. That develops positioning and USPs, and then you message it. That's the core of the rebrand. It's the core of building a brand. It's the same thing.
My question is, what is the trick to warming up your audience when you are involved in brand redesign?
So the first thing we establish is you have to have the core concepts right. Now basically becomes how do you manifest this? So there's in brand marketing, the most important content is the latent content. It's the content that's like, you imagine an iceberg. The part of the iceberg that's above the water is not as important as the part of the iceberg that's below the water. Now that you've gotten all the things I just talked about, all of the parts of the iceberg below the water, for the most part, messaging is obviously a little bit above the water. Now you're going out there and you want to create visual assets. You want to, build a website, social media accounts, logos, whatever it is. All of that is secondary, and all of that you need to make sure aligns to the fundamental brand identity and positioning that we just talked about. So again, my product identity or my brand identity is like we make complicated things simple. I would not, if I was that brand, create a very complicated looking logo because that messaging wouldn't align. So what you're worried about when you create the design assets fundamentally is alignment in tone, alignment in style, all of the latent signals, the color schemes give off, all that kind of stuff. Also like your wording and phrasing, like all of the top level messaging on a landing page or in a social media post, all of that, it needs to align with the core brand identity and brand positioning. If it doesn't, it won't work. If you're now talking about, I have that all done, I really matched it out, I have total alignment between the core concepts and the manifest content, the social media posts, the website, the whatever. Where do I start? How do I start? Teasing is a great way because again, you're trying to maybe attract a new audience, but you also don't want to lose the current audience at the same time. So you have to kind of like ease them into like what we once were into what we are now. Because again, if you're doing it the right way, it's not just a redesign. You just change the color scheme. If you're doing it the right way, it aligns to either a major change in positioning and messaging and at maximum, an identity change. So that you have to be able to subtly, slowly shift that audience. If you just make a clean break, it's very stark, it's jarring. You don't want to do that, right? When a great example, by the way, of seeing this is sports teams. When they reposition themselves, when they rebrand, right? The Cleveland Indians became the Cleveland Guardians. They very slowly they first tell you there's a change coming. They take some ideas about the names from the fans, which they don't actually read or care about. They already have a name. They tease out some of the color scheme. They tease out part of the jersey. They slowly make that transition because again, branding is associative. I have associations, very unconscious, latent associations to who you are as a brand. Those are very slow to move over. So you have to do that slowly. If you talk about where to start, I always start with the website. Your website is your home. That's the foundation of your web presence, in my personal opinion. I think people might say social media first. But again, if I had to do a rollout, I would make sure to do the rollout at the same time. But if I had to choose, you're asking me like, if you don't choose, I'll kill you. I choose the website and then the social media. I think it's less confusing to your audience.
Do you think that this will change in the future? Because I see that a lot of user habits are currently linked to social media being the starting position of their introduction and getting to know a brand.
I think in certain cases, people do operate like that. People have like YouTube channels. Maybe they don't have a website. I think they should have a website, by the way. But I'm not saying that because I work at Wix. I think fundamentally, as a brand, I'll tell you why. Because the website gives you a sense of permanence. Okay, social media, if you're talking about like latent signals, like branding again is all about signals that you're not aware that you're sending, that you're actually sending. If you're just on social media, you give off the signal that you're a little bit transient. You're not exactly permanent. If you have a website, I know where I can always find you. I know where I can always access you. And I know where I want to find everything about you. I can find it here. It makes you feel much stronger and much more permanent about the thing you're looking at. In this case, maybe a YouTube influencer or whatever it is. So I always recommend having the website. And it's for that reason that yes, social probably might whatever evolve a certain way. But I still feel like people look at the website on a much more deeper level. They have a much deeper association to the website. It feels like the home of that entity, of that brand, of that person. So again, always start at home.
I want to make the switch to the SEO side of things. How does brand redesign impact a company's SEO? Are there certain steps that you need to take to maintain your rankings and make sure that everything isn't messed up, that everything that you built up with SEO isn't messed up in just a matter of seconds or minutes?
So since we're talking about SEO, the answer is it depends. If you're just like redesigning the logo and the visual design or the messaging, like you're not actually changing the name of the brand, meaning you're not changing the URLs, the domain is the same, there might be some issues that pop up because, okay, you're changing you're restructuring the format of the website, you're moving things around or redoing the content and blah, 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 blah. So it always makes sense to, carefully track what's happening after you do that redesign. If you're doing a full-on migration, that's like a whole other thing. Like you need to make sure all the URLs are set up, yada, yada, yada. That's like a whole headache. I would say if you're an SEO or SEO oriented, don't not do the domain change because of the SEO. If you feel the brand needs a new name, like if you're Dunkin' Donuts, like, oh, I have to do a migration. I'm not going to become Dunkin'. Does that make any sense? I don't think that makes any sense.
Thank you, Mordy. I also wanted to ask you to share with us a couple of examples when branding did not go according to plan. You don't need to throw anybody under the bus here, but it would be great if you shared some examples with our listeners. So what are the common mistakes related to brand redesign?
So I'll tell you two things. The people I work with, when it doesn't go well, and sometimes it doesn't go well, like I really admit. That's not my fault though, no, I'm kidding. It's generally because there's a reluctance to evolving, to pivoting. Because a lot of the time it's very painful. Like as opposed to like SEO, like, oh, I'm not doing well, I'll change a header, right? With branding, it's personal. Like you need to change you. Some people are willing to make that change and some people are not willing to make that change. And your branding really, really comes down to who you actually are. And you can't change people. Like I'm not going to change a client. Like I can give them what I think is the reality. If they want to go ahead, they can go ahead. If they don't, they don't. When they don't, they usually don't do well, but whatever. Cases where it doesn't go well, and I'll go back to sports teams. Typically sports teams never goes well. There's a lot of positive feeling, a lot of nostalgia around those brands. So for example, the Washington Redskins changed their name as well. They should, because that was racist, to the Washington Commanders. And this goes like to the fundamental point. When you don't tap into your identity and you just go with something, it's going to go poorly. Again, Dunkin' Donuts, good switch. The Dunkin' reflected the actual identity. I love Dunkin' Donuts. I'm fine with Dunkin'. It bothered me for a minute, and but I'm okay with it now, right? Like it's like a website migration. When you migrate the people over, there's going to be a little bit of a dip. Like, I went to Dunkin', run Dunkin' Donuts. I love Dunkin' Donuts. But if you do it well, people get past it pretty quickly. Now, the Washington Commanders, there was a disconnect between them and their audience. There was a disconnect between them and who they actually were and their identity. There was a complete lack of identity. There was no real soul searching. The Cleveland Indians, when they did theirs and became the Guardians, they tried to tap into something from the city. The Guardians, a Guardian Bridge, their famous Guardian Bridge, so they became the Guardians. What they fundamentally missed on is that baseball is built. It's what you have to understand. Like what's the nature of the association between you and your audience? When it comes to baseball, as a baseball fan, I will tell you it's nostalgia. It's all of the history. So if I have a history with the team has a history, and that conjures up a lot of like childhood emotions, you have to go back to something that's nostalgic. What they did was they went to something that was related to the city. Oh, that represents us and the city. But what they failed to realize is that they have to create something that the audience can connect to. And what they should have done was gone to what the Cleveland Spiders. Why? Because that was the original name of the Cleveland Indians way back when. So you wouldn't have liked the name, but it still would have brought up all those feelings of nostalgia because you're connected to the history. If you fail to understand who you are, what you really are, in the case of this baseball team, you are your history, you're always going to end up making a ginormous mistake.
Yeah, it's very tricky to go back in time and talk about stuff that even like 10 years ago, like topics that we were able to discuss in the past are no longer acceptable. It makes sense, obviously. Just people have opened their eyes to how offensive certain topics are. So I actually have a baseball cap of the Washington Redskins from 1999, I think. So it has the logo, the old one, and I love that hat so much. But when it was brought up to my attention, like that this is very offensive, I completely understood it straight away.
But like what they should have done in that particular case is really like tap like there was a connection. Like what was the nature of the connection between the audience and the team, and really like tapped into that and chose a name based on that, not Commanders, which really like was related to the military because they're Washington D.C. and there's military in Washington D.C. Like that's not a very powerful connection.
So what are your thoughts on AI and sort of the future, how it can impact the way companies view branding and rebranding?
I have a lot of thoughts on AI. A lot of them are hot takes. When in terms of just pure research, like, yeah, you could use something like ChatGPT to get to understand, like, what do people think about Wix, or what do people think about SEO ranking? Because all the LLM is doing is scouring the web and putting together all the things people are saying across the web into one answer. So assuming that they're not hallucinating, or the AI rather is not hallucinating, you can get a pretty quick understanding of, okay, where is this brand at? So if I'm doing a brand audit, it might be something that if I just trying to get really in there really quickly to get a general, point of reference, that could be a good point of reference. You have to go much deeper. I'd say like AI and brand marketing are kind of like, they don't jive together outside of like some like small research things. And it's funny because you see brands automatically like moving into AI this and AI that and AI whatever. And this comes to understanding like where your audience is at and how they see the world. If your audience, let's say, is professional marketers, I mean like serious enterprise level marketers, they're probably interested in AI, but they're probably very not into it. They're probably very cautious about like, when do we use AI? When do we not use AI? Will it give us enough differentiation? Will it be able to keep our brand identity? All of the things that AI might have a problem with, those teams are probably very concerned with. So if you're plastering AI all over whatever you're doing, you might not actually be speaking to your audience, even though that's what the whole planet seems to be doing. At the same time, I think brands don't realize the possibilities or the potential that AI brings. Like AI can't do the things that a brand marketer can. Because again, it's the same reason why measuring brand is so hard. It's so qualitative. Well, the thing that AI has a problem with is qualitative analysis. So if you're going to use AI for qualitative analysis, i.e. brand marketing, you might be in a bit of trouble.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you about measurement. So like sort of, okay, as I hear your approach and I completely agree with you that you certainly have to have the experience to know what's working. And actually this weekend, I had my friend visited me and we played around. I just showed him ChatGPT, and he works at a beer brewery. And I just showed him like, okay, give me a brand redesign for this company located here. And it showed me the logo, the slogan, like even started working on the landing page, and it was just fun. It was fun. And he said, okay, this is fun, but like I need a lot more insight into just other than just a beautiful logo and something that explains. Maybe it could be on the money, right on the money. Like he really liked the slogan, but still at the end of the day, he wasn't confident enough to make this switch without considering the audience, doing all this research that is just indispensable to the process. So my question is, how do you measure the success of a brand evolution or a branding change? There's so many ways of calling it, but specifically I wanted to brand refresh efforts. So that's why I want to label them in this specific question.
Yeah. So there's like this misconception you can't measure brand. And I think the misconception or is caused by the fact that you can't measure brand the way you measure performance marketing, like SEO or CRO or whatever, the PPC. It's not linear. It's not direct. What you can do is paint a picture, right? You can see, okay, X date we rebranded. Our branded searches, are they up? Not what type of branded searches are up. Again, when it comes to brand, you can look at the numbers, but you also have to qualify the numbers. If people are, if I look at an SEO tool like SEO Ranking and they tell me, branded search queries are up, or I'm in Search Console, I can see the branded search queries are up. Great. But we have to qualify them. Maybe people are like, why is this brand redesign so bad? Like, they could be searching for a negative thing, right? So you have to qualify that. But you can start painting pictures with things like that. You can combine that with audience engagement. So I'm not talking about just the increase in, let's say, in YouTube views or social media likes or whatever it is. Obviously look at that, but you also have to qualify that, like the level of the engagement in the comments. So before the redesign, I had 10 comments on every post. After the redesign, now I have 20 comments. If they're all like thumbs up, is that really like what you were looking for? Hey, it's better than it was before, but you really want to engage your audience. You want to be thought-provoking. You want to have them comment things that are actually substantial, not just like, great job, I like this. So look at the quality of the comments, not just the amount of the comments. If you're looking at like partnerships, opportunities, like opportunity development is a great way to measure brand impact. Are things coming your way that weren't coming your way before? Are things coming your way that weren't coming your way before with X type of partner or with Y type of partner? What does that say? If it's X type of partner, maybe the redesign wasn't what we wanted. Like if you're trying to pivot to be more enterprise and now like the Small Business Bureau of Arkansas is contacting you to partner up, like maybe something went wrong there, right? If you did the redesign and now like the Enterprise Entity Association of Enterprise is now calling you to partner up, then maybe you did a good job, right? So you have to again look at the momentum and try to put your finger on the pulse of that momentum and looking at the numbers, but then qualifying the numbers to create an overall picture because, hey, SEOs, sometimes correlation does equal causation.
Great answer. We're actually pretty close to the end of our talk. I wanted to sort of dive into, well, not dive into, but like sort of dip our toes into the future of branding. So maybe how do you see this changing given all the technological advances happening, maybe the changing of habits from users? Where do you see brand evolution going in the next few years? Is it ever even going to change? Or do you think maybe this is one of the arts sciences that is going to stick around and be more true to its original self for a longer period of time?
Oh, I'm hot on brand. Like, I'm not saying because I'm a brand marketer. I wrote a whole post on SEJ, Search Engine Journal, like why I think like now is time for brand marketing. It's basically because of the intersection of AI content and the fact that the whole ecosystem is changing, meaning people are looking for something different from their content. For the same reason that people are maybe going to TikTok to get personal answers from personal people, like actual people, is the same reason why brand marketing comes into focus. And what I think is going to happen is there's a lot of brand marketing out. Like there's a lot of SEO out there that's not actual SEO. It's very surface level. It's not very deep. It's not very thought provoking, or it's not very thoughtful. Rather, I think you're going to see that brands are going to realize like they have to differentiate and that they have to speak to the audience in a very particular way, the right way. That you always want to speak to the audience the right way. But content consumption trends are changing. How people look at content, what people want out of content, how they relate to content is completely changing. So brands are going to have to pivot. I'll give you an example, like a concrete example of what I mean. Back in the day, a brand might have said like, we have the ultimate, most powerful SEO tool ever. And that was how you talked about your product. Language content is more conversational now. So that looks too salesy. It was always too salesy. But it really looks too salesy now because content's much more conversational. I want you to talk to me, not at me. So the way you write a landing page should change, and brands are having a hard time with this, especially the legacy brands. Like you see them like not being able to pivot the right way. Nike's a good example of not being able to pivot to the new world. Like their branding sucks right now. I'm just going to end on that hot take. Nike's branding sucks right now.
I love the pause after. Maybe we can use that soundbite. I'm not aware of what is happening with Nike right now, but I have seen at least work from Adidas. They're always going with the original 3 stripes, and then they moved to the new stripes, and then again, maybe this is something specific for England, because I know they have like a very athletic wear, like sort of like the hooligans, the football hooligans, the fans. So maybe that is something that plays into that. Obviously, they have Adidas needs to have a specific branding for England. I'm pretty sure that's the case. But for Nike, I don't know. I have not even seen it. So maybe you can elaborate on the.
So okay, so like really, really quick. So what Nike did was, and this is why like I know SEOs are listening to this, but this is why you don't want to give the keys to the kingdom to an SEO. What Nike did was during COVID, they said, and I don't know, it's funny how brands make this mistake. The bump they saw in online traffic and online purchasing and the focus on the digital space from the perspective of the consumer, they said is going to be here forever. Even though, like, honestly, one of the last things I'll buy online is a shoe. It's like one of the few things I'll still go to the store and buy, but whatever. So they doubled down on performance marketing. They doubled down on Google Shopping, and they doubled down on all of the e-com stuff. And it's amazing what they did. It's unbelievable. What they did was they said, we're going to go direct to consumer, get the consumer to come online and buy our product. The reason why you have like a Hoka now and you have like, On is because Nike did this. They said, we're going to forget about like the shoe store. So like Foot Locker, we're not going to focus on that as much. So Foot Locker started putting other brands on the shelves because Nike wasn't focused on that. So that's just like, wow, from a business strategy point of view, big miss. But because they focus so much on performance, it feels like their brand team is also a little lost at the moment. And it comes, by the way, that's a good point about like corporate synergy. There has to be internal branding. You have to be able to communicate the messaging internally. Because if you can't have that comms, you're just gonna have like one side of the company doing one thing, the whole brand identity getting lost in the mix. If you look at what they did with the Olympics, Nike released a commercial that was okay. When I say Olympics, I think like, camaraderie. I think people getting the world getting along together. The freaking symbol, the freaking logo of the Olympics is interlocking circles of different colors. So the whole world is together. What did Nike do? They ran an ad that basically was like, LeBron James like pushing somebody down and junking over him and saying like, does this make me a bad person? Am I a bad person because I want to win? I don't care about you. And it was literally William Dafoe, the villain from Spider-Man, the Hobgoblin, doing the voiceover, basically saying like, if I have no empathy for you, if I don't care about you at all, does that make me a bad person? I don't think so. And they ran it during the Olympics. Complete miss. Like you miss where your audience is at with the Olympics. You miss the fact that like most people wearing Nike aren't super athletes. So you're basically portraying yourself as the bully. So like the bully who picked on me in high school is now Nike. Thank you very much. I'll buy Reebok.
Wow. Great example. Thanks for mentioning this in the podcast. So hopefully our listeners definitely take all these lessons into account. Thanks, Mordy. And sort of to close off, I wanted to ask you, so if I'm a brand listening to this podcast right now, I'm excited about everything you've shared. And where do I start? Obviously, you already said like to look into your audience, but just sort of to like, I need a soundbite, like a main takeaway for our listeners. Just sort of as soon as we finish the podcast, they'll just jump right on your next piece of advice. So where do we start?
Everything in branding, in my opinion, starts again with that core identity of who are we? Are we the same as we were before? Are we different now? And doing that in a meaningful way, because people do focus on brand identity, but oftentimes it's surface level. You want to make sure you hit on existential emotion, a much deeper emotion than like, again, I'm using my amusement park example, fun. Okay, fun is very fleeting. You want to tap the identity is something existential, is something very, very deep. Your company has an identity, just like you have an identity. And that identity, while maybe not as nuanced as your personal identity, is something that should be substantive. It should have depth to it. And everything has to start with tapping into who you really are in a deep and meaningful way. And then taking that and meeting your audience and that intersection of who you are, who the audience is, and meeting them at kind of like in that breeding ground of good branding. But everything has to start with your identity.
And where can our listeners find you, Mordy? If they want to reach out for a consultancy, or maybe just read the different posts that you put out and the articles that you write, just where can people keep tabs on you and your activities and insights?
You can find me on LinkedIn mostly. I'm still on X a little bit, and keep your eyes out for a little side project that I'm doing. We'll call it, Unify Branding. Just putting a teaser out there. So keep a lookout for that. But if you're looking to consult with me, just find me on LinkedIn.
Today, Mordy Oberstein shared with us his vast experience on when brands should seriously consider rebranding. Hope our listeners are already looking for ways to put these insights to good use, be it with their own brand or that of their clients. Once again, I want to thank Mordy Oberstein for taking the time out of his packed schedule to be here with us. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe and join the next episode of the Do Follow podcast.